Hey everyone, just want to take a moment for our Wednesday online time to connect the dots to begin our time together and sharing just a little bit about what's coming up and what's going on within the life of our church here at First Baptist Church in Indianola. We are still excited to see how God's working, how God's moving. I've had people tell me how they've reached out to their one. I've had other text messages about people joining in and watching online that have been invited for numerous years potentially to our church, and now they're engaging through online worship, and we're excited about that. We're excited that God can use all this change. He can still use it, and so God's not done. And so let's be encouraged by that. We're still meeting online during this time, so both Wednesdays and Sundays will be online. So join us this coming Sunday, 10:45 a.m. On both Facebook and YouTube. We're on both of those platforms. So check us out on there. Share the link. Share what's going on with someone you know. You never know how God might use that. There's been a change in our radio broadcast. It's still at 6 p.m. It's still on the local AM radio station, but that's no longer 1380. It is 1390. Moving on up, right? We got a little more wattage, and so it's 1390 a.m. You can still hear it on 1380. But a little more wattage spreads it out, makes it a little bit better to listen to on 1390 WLNA. So make that note and that change. Hey, our target date for in-person on-campus worship to regather as a faith family, that is June 28th. You should have received that. All of our members should have received that letter in the mail with some additional information in that envelope. So we are dead set in moving towards that target date. And we are excited about how God's going to use that time to come together. Remember, there's going to be two opportunities for worship. There's going to be a 9 a.m. service and also our regular 10:45 a.m. service. We're asking that if you fall in that category that might be considered vulnerable by our officials, if you could plan to attend the 9 a.m. service. Now, if that's not your thing, you want to come at 10:45, we understand that. All members are welcome at either one of the worship services. But it would be helpful if you could come at 9. That way we're just able to clean afterwards and some things like that, and it can be clean leading up to, and so it would just be beneficial if you fall into those categories where either age or maybe some preconditions health-wise may have you in that category. If you could come at 9, that would be beneficial. But we will have two services, 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. I want you to stay tuned about that. Check your email about that. We're going to be sending out some more detailed information. I'm going to send out some video about how to enter the building and what that's going to look like. It's going to be some guidelines involved in all of this as we come back together. But remember, we want to model how to re-enter, and we want to go slow and cautiously. And remember what Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, to consider other interests more important than our own. And so we want to be mindful of all of that. There will only be worship services on that day. So we won't have childcare. We won't have Sunday school. We need to be mindful of that as well. It will only be those two worship services. I want to say a quick thanks to everyone, to our other sponsors that helped us get the Heroes Work Here banner out at the hospital. If you haven't seen it, going down Ketchens, make a point to check it out. It's a huge banner, and we just want to thank and celebrate those that have been working within our local healthcare system. We're praying for you. We're behind you. We support you 100%, and we celebrate you and how through this unprecedented and ever-changing environment when it comes to health, you have not only adapted, you have excelled, and we're thankful for you. Right now, we're going to enter into our Wednesday online time, but I want to introduce it just a little bit. Tonight we're going to have what we're calling a deep conversation episode. We did one of these back around Easter time. Me and Pastor Matthew Morgan from Grace Community Church, we did a deep discussion on the resurrection, the relevance of the resurrection, the historical accuracy of the resurrection, and really what that means for the believer and the follower of Jesus. In the climate that we find ourselves today, we've got two deep conversation episodes coming up this week. Tonight, the first one, our special guest is Brian Crawford. He is pastor of City Light Church in Vicksburg, and he's going to be coming to speak to our football teams at our football kickoff dinner, our annual kickoff dinner in July. So this episode that's about to debut is from a conversation I had earlier today with Brian Crawford regarding the gospel and the church and leading during this time where there needs to be a reframing and a better understanding and a conversation in regards to justice and many other issues when it comes to the climate of our culture right now. So we hope that it's beneficial for you. We hope you're encouraged and you're blessed by it, maybe even challenged by some of it to consider what this means moving forward. As a church, we need to lead out on issues such as this and set a biblical example and a gospel example as well. And so we hope that through this conversation, you will be encouraged this evening. On the schedule coming up for our next Deep Conversation episode, local pastor Doris Turner is going to join me for that, and we hope to have that up on Friday for further conversation as we move through these times together as the church. And we need to remember that we are God's church and we are together, and we need to have these conversations and exemplify the gospel and have a gospel focus during this time. So without further ado, here is the conversation with Brian Crawford.
All right.
Hey, we want to welcome everyone and thank you for tuning in to our Deep Conversation series. We did one of these episodes a while back at Easter time with Matthew Morgan. So we're jumping in with Brian Crawford today. If you're on Facebook, if you're watching through that, please take a moment to like and share. That gets past that algorithm techie stuff and gets it out to more people. So we would appreciate you doing that. It's an important conversation. We would like many more to engage and to join in. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content. We'd love for you to be in that space with us. I want to introduce today's guest, just mention his name. I'm super excited to welcome Brian Crawford with us. Brian is pastor, his husband, father of two boys, and bivocational lead pastor of City Light Church. That is a 3-year-old multi-ethnic church recently planted in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Brian and his wife, Candy, are natives. Shout out to Candy. Can't forget her, right, Brian?
Absolutely.
Shout out natives and longtime residents of Vicksburg, Mississippi. They have a passion to share the love of Jesus and the gospel to the city they hold dear. And you can find Brian online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. His handle is BCIS4JC, BCIS4JC. And then you can search City Light Church through all those platforms as well and connect with them and what God's doing within the life of that church, not too far from the Delta here in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Pastor Brian is also going to be with us this July for our annual football kickoff dinner. We got together, connected on that last year after he spoke to the Mississippi Baptist Convention. And so we're excited that he's going to come and speak into the next generation for us this coming July. So Brian, once again, thank you for taking the time today and meeting in this format with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. My pleasure. Glad to do it. Excited to do it.
So we had connected about that July event, but with everything going on, I wanted to reach out to you and connect in this format to have a conversation, a very important conversation. Leaders lead, right? And so
yeah, man.
As pastors here in the state of Mississippi, I believe we need to be examples of leading out and leading even in uncomfortable conversations, maybe, or difficult conversations, but they're gospel-centered conversations. And so I know time is of the essence for us. And so I want us to jump into our deep conversation questions right now in this next segment. So the very first question. So I'm here to listen today. That's my role. That's my goal. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. Kind of just to give a little personal background on this. I had put a social media post out regarding, when some things happened a few years ago, and tagged some friends I grew up with, played sports with, and I just, that left me feeling that something was missing, if you will. And I'm not trying to step on toes, but I think that we can be lazy by using social media, right? I think that we can post something and go about our lives. So I didn't want to do that. I want to engage not only you but others with some of this conversation, because as leaders, we need to be leading out on this, especially as leaders in the church. So that's where all this kind of generated from and
Yeah, man.
began. So the first question, from your experience as a follower of Jesus, what do we as the church need to know concerning racial injustice? As the local church, what do we need to know?
Um, Man, so obviously, man, this question can take on multiple layers, right?
Right, right.
There's a number of things I think we need
Sure.
to know,
So top
right?
one or two that
Yeah,
just, if we're going to take a next step, what's the one or two that we got to
yeah, yeah,
identify?
yeah. Um, for one, I'll give you three. All right. One, racial injustice is a historical issue. It's historical. It's historical. It's our historical and collective baggage as a country. As a country that is rescued by grace, right? And so it's our collective baggage. I think one of the reasons why we hit and miss one another in terms of understanding when it comes to the issue of racial injustice often is because we don't really even agree on the historical facts about racial injustice and the historical elements about racial injustice. And we don't see it, in terms of even those facts that we do agree on, we don't necessarily share the same experience. You're looking at it from one perspective, I'm looking at it from another perspective.
Right.
When you look at the historical markers in our country, for example, my white brothers and sisters, my white folk, they'll look at 1492, Christopher Columbus, and him, landing here in the Americas, and even black and brown people look at that differently, right? Because when we were in school, we were taught, hey, he discovered, and then later on you realize, well, people were already here, so what does discover really mean? So we even look at that differently. 1775 American Revolution, that's a marker. 1776 Declaration of Independence, that's a marker. The adoption of the U.S. Constitution, 1789, Civil War in the 1800s, all those are markers. Well, as it relates to African American, black and brown, we got totally different markers that we're looking at, right? 1619, first slaves arrived. 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, 1865 Juneteenth, when black folk are actually told in Texas, okay, now you're free. That's 2 years after Emancipation Proclamation. So even that celebration, there is a jubilant celebration called Juneteenth in many African American communities that many white folk look around and say, hey, why are we even, what holiday is this? I haven't even heard about this,
Right.
And so again, we're talking about totally different markers. The onset of Jim Crow, and that's a marker. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, that's a marker. And so we have two different sets of historical markers and facts, right? And that plays into how we view and how we think about the now. The way we look at
so part of what I hear you saying, instead of this present and we're going back past, it's almost like this is present and we're going back past like this.
Absolutely. So when you get to the present, there is a sense in which I as a black man, I have an understanding as to how we got here, right?
Yeah.
Based on my timeline of history. Mm. And then, for some white people, there, and some white brothers and sisters, they may say, well, I don't really get it, because we're looking at how we got here from two different sides of the train tracks. Yeah. And so that impacts everything as it relates to what we're doing now, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing that's important is that it's not a binary issue. When we think about racial injustice, so many times people say things like, well, I mean, why don't you care about black on black crime, right? I mean, and it's like, I do care. Yeah. And I can care. I mean, I can walk and chew gum. I can care about two things at the same time.
Right.
Not to mention, there's a whole lot of, facts and discussions about black on black crime that need to be unpacked as well, as it relates to the fact that just interracial crime itself is the highest marker of violent crime amongst people. And so black on black crimes, 90% of violent crime done against black people is 90% done by other black folk. Well, 83% of crimes against white people are done by other white folk. It's because we commit crimes with people that are closest to us, right?
Right.
But then the other thing you have to consider is the reality of why is this particular issue an issue as it relates to, you know, police and authorities and things of that nature. Well, if a person comes in my church and they are a visitor in my church, and that person is charged and then or accused, charged, and then found guilty of doing something inappropriate with one of our children at my church, I'm outraged. If a member comes to my church, or if a person comes to my church, becomes a member, becomes a trusted member in my church, and that person is charged or accused, charged, and found guilty of doing something inappropriate with my children, I'm even more outraged because this is a trusted person.
Yeah.
If the pastor of that church does something inappropriate with those children, then now I'm even more outraged. Why? Because not only do I have trust that I've established, but I place myself under that authority to protect and to serve me. And now that person is not protecting and serving me, but that person is actually abusing me and harming me. So why does racial injustice creep up to heightened levels of tension when you see cops involved? It's because Black folk in the community are saying, these are the people that are supposed to protect us. And instead of protecting us, they're violating their authority and doing things that are insensitive to us, that harm us, that leave wounds in our community. You know? And one more thing. Also, go ahead.
You know, if you're already wounded and you continue to get wounded, then you're not healing.
Exactly.
It's a perpetuation and a cycle of never being able to heal.
Exactly. And so, you know, you have to understand the outrage is folded in layers. There is an outrage as it relates to trust. Mm-hmm. Because hey, we're supposed to be placing our trust in these people. There's an outrage as it relates to authority, because these people have the authority to do what's right and to execute justice. Okay. And so that's the other piece, right? Yeah. But then, you know, the reality is, and we'll talk about this other piece later, but I do want to cover this. It's not a binary issue. It is a historical issue, but it's a biblical issue, right? Right. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. You know, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Right. Matthew 23, verse 23, that, you know, do not neglect the weightier matters of the law, which include justice, right? Jesus throws justice in that group of weightier matters. Right. Matthew 25, you know, when Jesus is making his great separation in the day of judgment, what does he say? He doesn't cover some of the things that we think he's going to cover. Hey, did you read the Bible every day? Hey, did you pray every day? Hey, no, he says, no, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. You know, you didn't clothe me. You clothed me. You didn't visit me in prison. It's like, Lord, who is that? You know, what are you talking about? Well, when you did this to these, you did this to me. And so he's covering matters of justice and mercy and saying, do right by people, you know. James chapter 2, partiality, and how James walks through the sin of partiality and the need to not be partial. You know, all of these things are matters of justice. And so that's why we have to think about this, because these are matters of justice. And I think we do think about this, Guy. I think we do. Right. It's just which matters of justice do we want to think about? Right. Is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Very, very insightful. Appreciate those three. Big three, quite the trifecta, but it just speaks to the multiple layers of all of this, but how it is a gospel issue. To transition a little bit to a cultural aspect of things, recently, Will Smith, entertainer, The Fresh Prince, I grew up with him. I was actually watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with my son the other day. But he posted, and I saw this on Instagram, racism has an increase, it's just being filmed. So share a little bit. How does this quote shed light on the temperature of our country from a cultural standpoint? Yeah. So we've started with, you know, the layers regarding justice and a gospel view of justice, biblical view of justice. Now let's take the temperature of the culture for just a moment, with influencers and entertainers and just the culture as a whole. How might that quote represent, some of that?
Yeah, yeah. I can tell you, man. A lot of Black folk that I talk to, brothers and sisters, man, they'll say that the modern invention of the cell phone camera was a game changer in terms of the pursuit of justice and unity and equity in our country. Just a complete and total game changer. Because for so many years, this has been common knowledge in Black homes. You've probably talked to several Black families, and they've given you the whole insight into the talk that they have with their Black children, their young Black men and young Black women, for that matter, in terms of, hey, this is what you need to, how you need to operate when you're in the presence of law enforcement, right? And it's because of these kind of wounds, these cultural and historical wounds through the years, that's just left people scarred and saying, man, I just don't want my kids to go through that, right? And having really no ability to shine light on it and be believed. Well, now you got vehicles to shine light on it and be believed. And so, really, it's ultimately all about accountability. I think the filming is just a deeper sense of accountability, which, to be honest with you, citizens should be able to hold those charged with protecting them accountable, right? And so this isn't a big deal in the sense of what should be expected. We should be able to hold our authorities accountable. Now, here's the thing. What happens in conversations like this, when you talk about the temperature increasing, part of the reason that the temperature increases is because of a significant misunderstanding. Again, binary thinking as it relates to what is the actual grievance that people actually have as it relates to, authorities in this issue. So, someone will bring to light this issue with police officers, and someone will bring to light that, hey, there's some injustice going on. And then another person on the other side who's defending cops will say, well, man, what are you, you're a cop hater? You got issues with cops. Yeah. And that creates an escalation in temperature. Right. Because I don't have to be a cop hater, right, to not want bad cops on the force. You know what I mean? Right. And so I can do their job. Exactly. Just want everybody to do their job. And so you can't afford. I heard one comedian say some jobs you can't afford to have bad apples, right? In policing, you can't afford to have bad apples. You have to have people with the highest of integrity. You have to have people that are compassionate. You have to have people that are looking to see their communities.
And there are a lot of those out there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely a lot of those out there.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing that we need to understand is that positions of authority attract people who desire to use authority for abuse.
I would even like to add, power is of the devil.
Yes, absolutely.
You see it with pastors. Pastors become celebrity pastors, and not to sidetrack, but pastors become celebrity pastors, and they got the following, and they've got the mega church, and they've got this, and this, and this, and it's Satan uses that.
Absolutely.
Satan uses that massive power they perceive to bring them away from humility and to bring them away from, prayer and the essential spiritual disciplines to lead a church. And the same would be true for anyone in any other lane. Like, Satan is going to use that power. And that's why this is a gospel issue. And I don't want to sidetrack your answer, but, devil uses the power.
Absolutely, without question. That, going back to our priest example, right, or our pastor's example of abusing children. Mm-hmm. If somebody comes along and they're doing, crazy and unmentionable things with our children, and we call for justice against that individual, it doesn't mean we hate pastors. You know what I mean? No. It doesn't mean that we hate pastors. It doesn't mean we hate priests.
No.
It just means that we want those that would abuse that authority out. And we know literally from facts and history that because of the authority that comes with positions pastorally and because of the authority that comes with positions, in the priesthood or whatever, it draws a certain type of people sometimes that will abuse it. Well, guess what? The FBI has discovered over the last 10, 15 years that the local law enforcement positions draw sometimes a certain type of individual. And so if there is no accountability or if there is just a all-out pursuit to protect those individuals, no matter what type of things that they do, then the only thing it's going to do is draw more of those types of individuals.
Right.
And so this has been an opportunity to not just simply up the temperature, which, obviously we want to make sure that the temperature doesn't lead to devastation and destruction and more pain and unnecessary pain. But it has been an opportunity to create the accountability that that many in the community have longed to see.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're seeing. It's not new. It's just people get a chance to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's jump into the next question and transition back to the church. There's Tim Keller was recently on a podcast, Carey Nieuwhof podcast, and I'm going to link that in the description of this video. And in one of his answers, he talked about, the country being polarized in some ways. But he turned it back to the church. He said the early church was, as he reads the Bible, the early church was sold out for racial justice, meaning all races are equal and made and created in the image of God. That they were deeply concerned for the poor and marginalized. They were pro-life, and a biblical church to have a biblical view of sexuality and marriage. So these were four kind of key pillars that he brings forth. And and you can listen to the podcast, you can find the transcript, but in his talk, in his answer, he shares that how two of those go with one political party and two of those kind of go with another political party. So wherever you find yourself as a pastor and a leader in a church, upholding all four of these can be a very great challenge. And so one that we might find in our context is upholding that racial justice. So next question, what steps do you believe that we need to take to uphold all four of these as the church and as the early church did, as we read from scripture, but specifically what steps to uphold racial justice as we seek to be a gospel exemplifying community?
Yeah. I'm a pastor that believes the old saying that you should, that your sermon preparation should have in one hand the Bible and in another hand the newspaper, meaning that you should never be culturally unaware in your preaching and teaching. You should be able to speak to what's happening in the culture in a biblically shaped fashion, in a biblically shaped way, right? But in all honesty, I think some of us just need to cut off our TVs. Just flat out. Yeah. I think we're being we've been discipled by talk radio, and we've been discipled by the 24/7 news cycle and the 24/7, not just news cycle, but the 24/7 commentary
bombardment
basically shapes how we internalize and receive the news. And so because of that,
something new for our church. My church, if you're listening, if you're watching, I hope you are. I've said that on Wednesday nights and at other times. Yep. Hey, don't be discipled by Fox News or CNN or whoever it might be.
Absolutely. I think many of us are. I just flat out think many of us are, which is why, we can look at, for example, a pandemic differently. It's like, we can't even agree on a pandemic, right? And so part of the reason why we can't agree on a pandemic is because we're getting our information from two totally different streams, and we're getting fed 24/7 on that information. I tell our folks at City Light, man, listen, I watch every single one of them. If I'm going to watch them, I have to watch all of them. And so I'm going to watch Fox News. I'm going to watch CNN. I'm going to watch MSNBC. Yeah. I have my certain people on each channel that I watch, and I kind of just listen to. And the reason why is because I just want to get a holistic perspective. I don't want to get a right narrative. I don't want to get a left narrative. I I just want to get every all those pieces, and amongst all of them, maybe we can get the truth, and so that's kind of how I take it. So I think really you need to be discipled through Scripture, because when you're discipled through Scripture, you hear Deuteronomy 10 where the Lord says he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner, giving them food and giving them clothing, and love the foreigner, therefore, because you were foreigners in the land of Egypt.
Right.
When you read through Scripture again, you find Micah chapter 6 verse 8, who tells us to love justice, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. You find James chapter 2 and James and talking about partiality. You find you find the sexual ethics, of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, where it talks about, the height or the gravity of marriage, and how we should, fight for our marriages at all costs, and not buy into the culture of easy divorce. You find the call for one man and one woman, as you read through the Gospels, and then also Genesis 1. The call, the reality that God has created us in his image and his likeness, so all of us have inherent value and inherent worth, including those that are in the womb, and so you find the call to fight for abortion, or to fight against abortion rather, and to call mothers to protect the children in their womb, and to help them, not just check a ballot, right, or not just check a box on the ballot, but to find ways to help them care for the children that are in the womb. And so for, one of the things that we try to do at City Light, I mean, maybe a couple of years ago even, we did what we call the Biblical Day of Justice, where we packed up in cars, we drove over to Jackson. There was a candlelight vigil for the unborn that night. But we spent the entire day there, because that morning we went to the new Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we spent time just kind of taking all of that in. We left, we had dinner together, we discussed what we saw there, and then from there we went to the Capitol steps for the candlelight vigil for the unborn. Why? Because we are working to try to fuse biblical justice together in a way that all of the partisanship has kind of tried to tear it apart, right? And so I think if you're discipling through Scripture, and not through Fox and CNN, I think we get there. But that's one of the big hurdles for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of building for us as leaders in a lot of ways, but specifically in this way. We come to our last question now, and this is just a personal one for me. And I just want to hear what you want to share. What do I need to know as a follower of Jesus, as a white male, as a pastor of an established church in the state of Mississippi? What do I need to know concerning racial injustice?
Yeah. I think we need to know, number one, that this is a long road. We're not going to solve these issues in a day. Dr. John Perkins, who I have great love and great respect for, out of Jackson, Mississippi, one of the great civil rights advocates, and just great Christian men, just flat out good Christian brother. There's no one finer. He whenever or many times when I've heard him speak, he would always speak about the strides that have been made. He would be overjoyed looking at, looking across kind of the stratosphere of this issue and seeing Black, white, together thinking through this issue now, asking questions, trying to learn. And he would be so overwhelmed and so overjoyed by it. And initially I would kind of, in some ways, not dismiss it, but almost question it, like, Doc, man, we got so much farther to go. But what I see now and what I understand now is that he is taking a long game approach, right? In the twilight of his life, he's seen where we were.
Yeah.
And so he is celebrating where we've come, how far we've come, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so I think we all as pastors, whether we be
Right.
black or white, we first have to do that, right? We cannot grow disenchanted or frustrated because
Right.
we got so far to go. We got to celebrate where we are,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But go. I'm sorry.
No, I was agreeing. I think your example from, the one you're looking up to and the one that's bringing a positivity to some of this, like,
Right.
let, as we reflect it, and I think this connects with that third question too. Let's don't be driven to the negative. As leaders, let's prop up some positive,
Right.
as well.
Right.
Let's prop up some positive about where some things have gone. Do we still have a long way to go? Yes. Is there need for the church to lead out in the healing process and injustice? Yes, but let's look at some of those positives, because that can fuel us to continue the conversation and continue to move forward.
Absolutely, and that's the point, is that hope is not hopeless. I
Yeah.
mean, and we have a biblical hope that says that our God is still on the throne, right?
Right.
And so that's one piece. The other piece is obviously is pastors have to be uncomfortable. We have to be uncomfortable, and we have to disciple our parishioners and disciple our members in being uncomfortable. Jesus says this in terms of the way of the cross. If any man desire to come after me, let him deny himself, let him take up his cross and let him follow. Denial is not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Dying, in terms of taking on the cross, is not comfortable. And so as it relates to this issue of racial injustice, part of the reason why the church has abdicated its role in terms of bringing healing is because the church has wanted to be comfortable. The church hasn't wanted to confront the issue. Like you said, we'll confront abortion because it's part of our pet peeves and our partisan peeves, or we'll confront sexuality because it's a part of our partisan peeves. But when we get into racial issues, we say, hey, just preach the gospel. Well, hold on now. If I can preach the gospel and the gospel informs abortion, and if I can preach the gospel and the gospel informs, sexuality and marriage, then certainly I can preach the gospel and the gospel inform whether or not I love someone based on class, based on race, based on nationality. And so we just have to be willing to wade into that discomfort, and have the necessary conversations. Like you said, the one that we're having right now, not an easy conversation. What happens oftentimes is people immediately say, I don't like this conversation, so I'm leaving the church. But I'm like, okay, let's talk about family. Right. How many times has family, if you're really family, how many tough conversations has a father had to have with his son? Has a husband had to have with his wife, or a wife with her husband? Mm-hmm. Has an uncle had to have with a nephew? Right. And you know what happens after those tough conversations? Typically, everybody continues to live life together as family. You know why? Because they understand that they're family. Yeah. Part of the reason why we are willing to, bail out at the first sign of difficulty, or the first sign of discomfort, is because we have yet to understand that we are truly family. And if we are truly family, we should be able to have the tough conversations and wade into the discomfort for the glory of God, for the unity that he prays for in John 17.
Yeah. I think what you're saying really chips away at cultural Christianity, because what we're seeing here is that cultural Christianity is about comfort, and it's usually a package deal with wherever I lean politically. Right. Authentic and genuine gospel-centered, biblical-centered Christianity, there should be uncomfortable. I should never be comfortable with my sin. Right. And maybe not only have a newspaper when I read the Bible, but have a mirror when I read the Bible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, man, as we wrap up, I want to say thanks again. Anything you'd like to add before we check out?
Yeah, man. I just want to say I'm thankful, right? I'm thankful that you're leading out and tackling the tough issues. I know that our current environment is chaotic. There's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of opportunists on both sides of the political spectrum that are looking for ways to kind of seize on this anger and this pain and this frustration to drive a wedge, even to drive a wedge between us even more. And so the church is going to have to be the light that God has called us to be, to shine in this very deep and very dreadful darkness, to shine His light. And in order to do that, we have to have the conversation. We can't do it without the conversation. And if we don't have the conversation with our people, the world is going to have the conversation with our people. So I would much rather pastors tackling this issue to try to inform and shape it in a biblical way than to let our brothers and sisters who God has charged us to shepherd, to let them go out and have Fox and CNN and MSNBC shape the discussion. And so let's continue to have the discussion, brother. Let's continue to have it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, man, appreciate you. Look forward to having you here in July in Indianola, speaking to the next generation. And may God continue to bless you and use you there in Vicksburg for City Light Church and even beyond that. And we'll talk to you soon.